King Solomon's life is one of the most compelling narratives in the Bible, a blend of wisdom and grandeur with underlying complexities and challenges. Rising as the successor of King David, Solomon's reign would bring about Israel's most prosperous and peaceful era. But beneath the brilliance of his achievements lay decisions that would ultimately steer him and the kingdom toward a path of turmoil. In this video, we'll delve deeply into the life of Solomon, examining his journey from his unexpected ascension to the throne to his final days. And if you're finding this topic intriguing so far, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel to support our work in bringing these insights to life. Solomon's journey begins with a series of dramatic events surrounding his rise to power. As the son of David and Bathsheba, Solomon was not the first in line for the throne. His older half-brother, Adonijah, attempted to claim the throne for himself following David's weakening health. Despite Adonijah's ambitions, Solomon had been chosen by God as David's successor, a choice that was confirmed through the prophet Nathan and Bathsheba's intervention. In 1 Chronicles 22, David shares the divine message that would set Solomon apart as Israel's next king, saying that God intended for Solomon to build a house for him. David recounts God's words, which reveal the nature of Solomon's destiny. "You will have a son who will be a man of peace and rest, and I will give him rest from all his enemies on every side. His name will be Solomon, and I will grant Israel peace and quiet during his reign." As Solomon ascended to the throne, he embodied his name, which means peace, by striving to establish unity and security in Israel. In these early days, Solomon made a profound decision that would define his legacy. Rather than seeking riches or power, Solomon sought wisdom, a quality that would set him apart from other leaders of his time. In a pivotal moment recorded in 1 Kings chapter 3, Solomon visited the high place at Gibeon, where he offered sacrifices to God. That night, in a dream, God appeared to him saying, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." Instead of requesting wealth or long life, Solomon asked for discernment to govern the people and the wisdom to administer justice. This request reflected his awareness of the immense responsibility he had taken on, as well as his humility in recognizing that he could not succeed without God's guidance. God's response to Solomon's request marked the beginning of a reign unparalleled in its prosperity and wisdom. Pleased with Solomon's humility, God granted him not only the wisdom he requested, but also wealth, honor, and peace. Solomon's wisdom became renowned throughout the ancient world, attracting visitors and admirers from far and wide. One of the most famous demonstrations of this wisdom is the story of the two women who came before Solomon, each claiming to be the mother of the same infant. Recorded in 1 Kings 3:16-28, this episode showcases Solomon's remarkable insight and ability to judge, not only based on the facts, but on the underlying intentions of those involved. In this case, two women came to Solomon with a tragic and complicated situation. Each claimed to be the mother of a surviving baby, as one of the infants had died. Both women lived in the same house and had no witnesses to confirm their stories. Rather than making an immediate judgment, Solomon suggested a shocking solution. He ordered the living child to be divided in half, with each woman receiving part of the child. The real mother, horrified at the thought of harm coming to her baby, immediately pleaded with Solomon to give the child to the other woman instead. The other woman, however, agreed to the division. Solomon's proposal revealed the true mother, who was willing to sacrifice her claim to save the child's life. By declaring the real mother to be the woman who showed genuine compassion, Solomon's wisdom gained legendary status among the people, solidifying his reputation as a discerning and just king. Solomon's wisdom extended beyond his judgments in court. He was also an accomplished writer and thinker. He is credited with authoring several books of the Bible, including much of the book of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Solomon. These writings reveal a deep understanding of human nature, morality, and the complexities of life. In Proverbs, Solomon offers practical advice on topics like wisdom, justice, and integrity. Ecclesiastes, on the other hand, explores the deeper questions of existence, purpose, and the transient nature of worldly pursuits. These writings provide insight not only into Solomon's intellect, but also into his introspective nature and philosophical mind. One of Solomon's most significant contributions to the legacy of Israel was the construction of the Temple in Jerusalem. This project was not just an architectural achievement, but a spiritual symbol for the people of Israel. The temple served as the permanent center of worship, replacing the portable tabernacle that had been used since the time of Moses. It was a place where people could connect with God, offer sacrifices, and observe holy ceremonies. Solomon's father, David, had dreamed of building a house for God, but he was not permitted to do so due to his history as a warrior. Instead, David had gathered resources and laid the groundwork for the temple, leaving the actual construction to Solomon. The temple was constructed with unparalleled grandeur and splendor, incorporating valuable materials such as cedar from Lebanon and vast quantities of gold and precious stones. The inner sanctum of the temple, known as the Holy of Holies, housed the Ark of the Covenant and symbolized God's presence among his people. The building process itself took 7 years to complete, involving skilled craftsmen, intricate designs, and detailed planning. When the temple was finally completed, Solomon held a grand dedication ceremony, praying for God's continued favor and presence among the people of Israel. He dedicated the temple with a heartfelt prayer that acknowledged God's greatness and the people's need for his guidance. Solomon's prayer is recorded in 1 Kings 8 and stands as a testimony to his devotion and the depth of his relationship with God. The dedication of the temple represented a high point in Solomon's reign. For the people of Israel, the temple was more than just a building. It was a powerful symbol of their covenant with God and their unique identity as his chosen people. The completion of the temple fulfilled David's dream and marked a new era in Israel's spiritual journey. Under Solomon's leadership, Israel experienced a time of peace, prosperity, and cultural richness. Trade flourished, alliances were formed with neighboring nations, and Israel became a beacon of wealth and knowledge in the ancient world. Solomon's diplomatic acumen was another defining characteristic of his reign. He established alliances with surrounding nations, fostering peaceful relationships and expanding Israel's influence. The visit of the Queen of Sheba is a well-known example of Solomon's far-reaching reputation. She came to Jerusalem, intrigued by reports of his wisdom, and presented Solomon with challenging questions. As recorded in 1 Kings chapter 10, the queen was deeply impressed by his answers, as well as by the grandeur of his court, the wealth of his kingdom, and the efficiency of his officials. She praised Solomon's God, acknowledging the blessing and wisdom that had been bestowed upon him. But Solomon's diplomatic strategies extended beyond hospitality. He also married foreign princesses, forming alliances with powerful nations like Egypt and Tyre. These marriages were not just personal unions, they were political strategies designed to secure peace and strengthen Israel's standing in the region. By marrying daughters of foreign rulers, Solomon forged bonds that helped to stabilize his kingdom and ensure its prosperity. These alliances, while effective politically, also brought foreign influences into Israel. Solomon's wives brought with them their own beliefs and cultural practices, which eventually led him to a path of spiritual compromise. Throughout the first part of Solomon's reign, his wisdom, wealth, and achievements reached astonishing heights. His writings, his building projects, and his diplomatic efforts all pointed to a ruler whose influence was both profound and far-reaching. However, the very characteristics that initially brought him success, his openness to new ideas, his curiosity, and his desire for alliances, would also become his greatest vulnerabilities. Solomon's story serves as a powerful reminder that even the wisest of leaders can be led astray if they lose sight of their core values. As Solomon continued to rule, his choices became more complex and, at times, conflicted with the faith and obedience he initially showed. The political alliances he created through marriage introduced foreign deities into Israel, a development that would eventually lead him away from the exclusive worship of the God of Israel. Though he was granted unmatched wisdom, Solomon was still susceptible to the pressures of his political environment and the influence of those closest to him. As we see Solomon's story unfold, it becomes clear that his journey is one of both triumph and challenge, a tale that explores human nature, the dangers of compromise, and the weight of responsibility. While his achievements were numerous, his later choices reveal the delicate balance between wisdom and folly, and the importance of remaining grounded in one's faith. Stay tuned as we explore Solomon's later years, where we'll examine the critical choices he made, the warnings he ignored, and the spiritual decline that cast a shadow over his legacy. Solomon's reign began in brilliance, marked by his divine wisdom, wealth, and monumental achievements. But as the years passed, Solomon's journey took a complex turn. The qualities that initially brought him success, wisdom, diplomacy, and openness, began to lead him down a path filled with compromises. Though he had started with an unwavering focus on his faith and a genuine commitment to lead God's people with righteousness, Solomon's reign gradually began to reflect a shift. The influences of foreign alliances, the temptations of wealth, and the pressures of power would play a crucial role in changing his priorities, pulling him away from his foundational faith. One of the key elements of Solomon's downfall was his choice to marry numerous foreign wives, something explicitly warned against in God's law. The Bible records in 1 Kings 11 that Solomon took for himself many foreign wives, including princesses from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and Hittite nations. These unions, while politically advantageous, came with a significant spiritual risk. God had commanded the Israelites not to intermarry with foreign nations, specifically because of the risk that they would turn the people's hearts toward other gods. In Deuteronomy 7:3-4, God warned, "Do not intermarry with them, for they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods." Despite these instructions, Solomon's political ambitions outweighed his adherence to God's law, and he entered into alliances through these marriages. As Solomon's wives settled in Israel, they brought their customs, beliefs, and idols with them. Over time, they began to influence Solomon's religious practices, introducing him to worship practices outside of his faith. Solomon's initial curiosity about foreign cultures and religions turned into something far more damaging. He started participating in the worship of foreign gods. He built altars and high places for the idols of his wives, including the gods Chemosh of Moab, Milcom of the Ammonites, and Ashtoreth of the Sidonians. This departure from the exclusive worship of the God of Israel was a significant shift. Solomon, who had once dedicated the magnificent temple to God, was now leading Israel into spiritual compromise, allowing worship of idols within his kingdom. This turning point illustrates a critical truth about Solomon's character and choices. Though he was immensely wise, Solomon was not immune to the weaknesses that come with wealth, power, and influence. His decision to build shrines for his wives' gods went beyond personal deviation. It set an example for the people of Israel, demonstrating that the king's faith in God was wavering. This gradual shift didn't happen overnight. It began with small compromises and eventually grew into outright participation in idol worship. For a king chosen by God to lead his people, this drift from faith was a devastating development. Solomon's choices didn't just affect him, they would alter the spiritual direction of Israel for generations. As Solomon's heart drifted away from God, the Bible tells us that God's response was one of disappointment and warning. In 1 Kings chapter 11, 9-13, it states, "The Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice." Despite the blessings and wisdom granted to him, Solomon chose a path that directly contradicted God's commandments. God then revealed to Solomon that his disobedience would bring about severe consequences, not just for Solomon, but for his descendants. God declared that he would tear the kingdom away from Solomon's family, leaving only a fraction of it for his son to rule over. This decision from God marked a turning point, setting into motion events that would lead to the eventual division of the kingdom of Israel. With the warnings given, adversaries began to rise against Solomon. One such adversary was Hadad the Edomite, who harbored resentment against Israel due to David's previous conquests. Another enemy, Rezon, son of Eliada, also opposed Solomon, further destabilizing the kingdom. But perhaps the most significant opposition came from within Solomon's own people. Jeroboam, one of Solomon's officials, rose as a leader of opposition and eventually became the first king of the northern kingdom of Israel. Solomon's failure to uphold God's commandments set the stage for these adversaries to come forward, and the seeds of division were sown. The Bible records that Jeroboam's rise to power was not coincidental, but rather part of God's judgment on Solomon's unfaithfulness. In 1 Kings chapter 11, 29-39, the prophet Ahijah met Jeroboam and tore his new cloak into 12 pieces, symbolizing the 12 tribes of Israel. He then gave 10 pieces to Jeroboam, telling him that God would give him authority over 10 of the tribes of Israel due to Solomon's disobedience. This prophecy foreshadowed the division of the kingdom and the weakening of Solomon's once glorious empire. Although God assured Solomon that the kingdom would not be torn away during his lifetime, the prophecy highlighted the consequences of his actions on his descendants and on the kingdom as a whole. Solomon's later years reflect the spiritual decline that had gradually taken over his life. The king who had once dedicated himself to God's wisdom and the construction of the temple had now filled his heart with the distractions of wealth, foreign influences, and idolatry. It is here that we see one of the deepest messages of Solomon's story. Even the most gifted, wise, and anointed leaders are vulnerable to failure if they do not remain grounded in their faith. The temptations Solomon faced, power, wealth, and the influence of others, are temptations that are still relatable today. Solomon's story serves as a sobering reminder that unchecked desires and a lack of accountability can lead even the wisest among us down a path of destruction. In the closing chapters of Solomon's reign, the kingdom began to show cracks under the weight of his compromises. While he had successfully expanded Israel's wealth and influence, these achievements came with a high price. To fund his ambitious projects, Solomon implemented heavy taxation and conscripted labor from his people. The burden of these taxes and labor demands started to create unrest among the tribes of Israel. Many Israelites began to feel that the prosperity and glory of Solomon's reign came at their expense, and dissatisfaction grew. This discontent would be one of the factors leading to the eventual division of the kingdom after Solomon's death. Solomon's fall serves as a critical lesson on the dangers of pursuing success and power without remaining true to one's core beliefs and values. Despite his extraordinary gifts, Solomon became distracted by worldly pursuits, gradually allowing his heart to be led away from God. The decline in his faith was not due to a lack of knowledge or understanding, but rather a slow erosion of his commitment to God's commands. This journey from wisdom to folly serves as a powerful illustration of how seemingly small compromises can accumulate over time, leading to significant consequences. One of the most poignant aspects of Solomon's story is that he was aware of the dangers he was falling into. The book of Ecclesiastes, which is traditionally attributed to Solomon, reflects his deep sense of regret and awareness of the futility of his pursuits. Ecclesiastes explores themes of vanity, the transient nature of life, and the ultimate emptiness of wealth, pleasure, and earthly achievements. In Ecclesiastes chapter 1-2, Solomon famously declares, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity," expressing his realization that the things he once valued and pursued held no lasting fulfillment. This sentiment resonates throughout Ecclesiastes as Solomon reflects on the lessons he learned too late. The idea that true satisfaction and purpose can only be found in a life devoted to God. Despite his regrets, Solomon's story offers valuable insights into the nature of faith, wisdom, and human fallibility. His reflections in Ecclesiastes demonstrate an understanding that life's meaning is found not in worldly accomplishments, but in a sincere relationship with God. In Ecclesiastes 12:13, Solomon concludes with a powerful statement that captures the essence of his journey. "Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man." This final reflection encapsulates the lesson Solomon wished to impart, a lesson born from his own experience of success, failure, and spiritual renewal. As Solomon approached the end of his life, his legacy was left in a precarious position. The kingdom he had worked to build was facing internal divisions, and the people's dissatisfaction was at an all-time high. His son, Rehoboam, would inherit a throne under significant pressure, and the kingdom's unity was already in question. Solomon's legacy is marked by a mixture of incredible achievements and profound mistakes. His wisdom brought Israel to new heights, but his compromises ultimately weakened the nation's spiritual foundation. In the story of Solomon, we see a reflection of the challenges many of us face in balancing ambition, responsibility, and faith. His story is both an inspiration and a warning, illustrating the heights that can be reached with God's guidance and the dangers of straying from one's faith. Solomon's life encourages us to pursue wisdom and to seek God's guidance in all things, but also to be vigilant against the distractions and temptations that can lead us away from our path. As we close this section, remember to stay with us for the final part, where we'll dive into the division of Solomon's kingdom, the consequences of his legacy, and how his story serves as a lasting lesson for us today. Solomon's death marked the end of a monumental era in Israel's history. Yet, his legacy was far from simple. His reign, marked by both incredible achievements and substantial failures, set the stage for one of the most turbulent periods in Israel's history. Solomon's actions in his later years, particularly his decisions to incorporate idol worship and impose heavy labor and taxes on his people, would have consequences that reverberated through the generations. The immediate impact of Solomon's choices became evident as his son Rehoboam ascended to the throne. Rather than inheriting a united and thriving nation, Rehoboam faced a fractured kingdom, its stability threatened by internal discontent and external opposition. The challenges facing Rehoboam were a direct result of Solomon's heavy-handed rule. The people of Israel, burdened by years of forced labor and taxation to fund Solomon's ambitious building projects, were eager for a change. As soon as Rehoboam took the throne, representatives from the tribes came to him with a plea for relief, hoping he would be a more compassionate leader than his father. In 1 Kings 12:4, the people asked, "Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you." This request underscored the resentment that had been building under Solomon's rule, resentment that was about to reach a breaking point. Rehoboam's response would be a critical test of his leadership. Initially, he sought counsel from two groups: the elders who had advised his father and the younger men with whom he had grown up. The elders, understanding the growing unrest among the people, urged Rehoboam to ease the burdens placed on Israel, recognizing that a show of compassion and understanding could secure his position and foster unity. They advised him in 1 Kings 12:7, "If today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants." This advice echoed the principles of wise leadership that Solomon himself had once embodied: humility, empathy, and a desire to serve. However, Rehoboam ultimately chose to ignore the elders' counsel, instead embracing the advice of his younger peers, who urged him to assert his authority and increase the people's burdens. In response to their plea, he declared, "My father made your yoke heavy. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions." 1 Kings 12:14. This harsh response was a turning point. The people, already weary of oppressive rule, viewed Rehoboam's declaration as a rejection of their legitimate grievances. Their reaction was swift and decisive. 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel broke away, forming a separate kingdom under Jeroboam's leadership, while only Judah and Benjamin remained under Rehoboam's rule in the south. Thus, the united kingdom Solomon had built was split in two: the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. The division of the kingdom signified not only a political split, but also a spiritual one. The northern kingdom, under Jeroboam's rule, quickly fell into idolatry as Jeroboam sought to prevent his people from traveling to Jerusalem for worship. Fearing that allegiance to the temple in Jerusalem would weaken his rule, Jeroboam established alternative places of worship, setting up golden calves in Bethel and Dan. He told the people, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." 1 Kings chapter 12:28. This decision introduced a new era of spiritual compromise in Israel, one that would lead the northern kingdom further away from God's covenant. The consequences of Solomon's choices, particularly his departure from faithful worship, were not limited to his own generation. By allowing idol worship into Israel, Solomon had set a precedent that later leaders would follow, contributing to a cycle of disobedience that eventually led both Israel and Judah into exile. Reflecting on Solomon's life, we see a narrative rich with both wisdom and warning. Despite his vast knowledge, Solomon allowed himself to be led astray by the very temptations he had warned others about. His writings, particularly in Ecclesiastes and Proverbs, provide insights into the futility of chasing earthly desires at the expense of spiritual integrity. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon speaks from experience, acknowledging the emptiness of wealth, pleasure, and human achievement. He writes in Ecclesiastes 2:10-11, "I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind." This perspective, coming from a man who had experienced life's greatest riches and pleasures, serves as a profound reminder that true fulfillment cannot be found in material wealth or worldly accomplishments. Throughout his life, Solomon sought meaning in various pursuits, wisdom, wealth, relationships, and power, but ultimately concluded that these pursuits were empty without a connection to God. His reflections lead to the powerful conclusion found in Ecclesiastes chapter 12:13. "Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind." These words encapsulate the essence of Solomon's message to future generations, a message born from his own experiences and mistakes. Solomon's story reminds us that even the wisest among us can lose sight of what truly matters when we allow ourselves to be swayed by external influences and personal desires. The legacy of Solomon is a complex one. He was a king of immense wisdom, whose insights and contributions have shaped spiritual thought for centuries. His achievements, especially the construction of the temple, stand as a testament to his devotion and love for God. Yet his life also serves as a cautionary tale, illustrating the dangers of allowing pride, wealth, and foreign influences to erode one's faith. The split of his kingdom, the subsequent decline of Israel, and the ultimate exile of God's people highlight the lasting impact that one leader's choices can have on an entire nation. In examining Solomon's story, we find valuable lessons applicable to our own lives. His story calls us to examine our own sources of fulfillment and to question whether we are investing our lives in things of eternal value or merely chasing after temporary pleasures. Solomon's wisdom encourages us to seek God above all else, recognizing that only through a relationship with Him can we find true meaning and satisfaction. Solomon's life challenges us to avoid the pitfalls of compromise, to remain steadfast in our faith, and to prioritize God's commandments over worldly pursuits. Ultimately, Solomon's life serves as a reminder that wisdom is not simply a matter of intellectual knowledge, but a commitment to live in alignment with God's will. As we seek to apply these lessons, let us remember the words of Proverbs 4:7, which Solomon himself wrote. "The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. Though it cost all you have, get understanding." Solomon's story urges us to pursue a wisdom that leads to spiritual growth and draws us closer to God, rather than one that merely gratifies our own desires. Thank you for joining us in exploring the life of King Solomon. If you found this story thought-provoking and meaningful, please consider giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you'll be part of a community that explores profound insights from the Bible, drawing lessons that inspire and challenge us. Don't forget to leave a comment below sharing what part of Solomon's story resonates most with you. Your support helps us bring these messages to more people, fostering deeper conversations about faith, wisdom, and the timeless truths of Scripture.